A little girl stood motionless outside Buckingham Palace, hands clasped, lips sealed, eyes searching for someone she hadn't met yet. No one around her noticed anything wrong, except one royal guard. He wasn't supposed to move, and he wasn't supposed to speak. But what he sensed, no tourist could explain. And when he broke protocol to step toward her, he uncovered a truth that chilled everyone watching. So what did this Coldstream Guard see that no one else did? Before we reveal it, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let's get into it. It was the kind of morning tourists prayed for when booking their flights. Cloudless, golden, with a breeze just gentle enough to flutter flags above Buckingham Palace. By 10:30, the forecourt was alive with clicking camera shutters, parents hoisting children onto shoulders, and sun hats bobbing in every direction. Before we reveal what he sensed that no tourist could explain, hit the subscribe button and drop a comment below, telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. Among the sea of tourists, immovable and regal, stood Staff Sergeant Malcolm Raye of the Coldstream Guards. 39 years old, with 17 years of military service that had taught him one crucial lesson. Danger doesn't always announce itself with explosions or gunfire. Sometimes it whispers. Behind that stoic exterior was a mind that never stopped cataloguing, never stopped watching. He'd survived 3 tours in Mali, walked through villages where children's silence meant something was very wrong. Now he applied those same instincts to reading crowds outside Buckingham Palace. He spotted her during his second sweep of the morning crowd. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old. Neat brown braid hanging down her back, navy dress that looked expensive, but somehow wrong on her small frame, pink shoes that didn't match, the left clearly larger than the right, like someone had grabbed whatever was available in a hurry. Her hands were clasped behind her back, with the kind of rigid discipline you don't usually see in children unless they've been taught to stand that way. But here's what made Malcolm Raye's pulse quicken. She wasn't doing what children do. She wasn't bouncing on her toes trying to see over adults, wasn't tugging on anyone's sleeve asking, "Are we done yet?" Wasn't even looking at the guards with that wide-eyed wonder that made most kids point and whisper. Instead, she stood apart from a loose group of adults, maybe 7 or 8 people, scattered around the rope barriers, like they'd been arranged rather than gathered naturally. Raye watched the group for several minutes, his trained eyes picking up details that would escape most observers. The woman in the blue jacket checked her map with the kind of deliberate focus people use when they're pretending to be busy. A man in a brown fedora took selfies by the rope, but Raye noticed he was actually scanning the crowd behind his phone. Another man sipped from a takeaway cup, his back turned to the girl, but his shoulders angled just enough to keep her in his peripheral vision. None of them spoke to each other. No shared laughter, no "look at that" moments, no natural family banter. When a group of laughing children passed close, she didn't smile or show interest. She tightened her fingers and watched them go with heartbreaking longing. Then her eyes met his across the forecourt. It lasted 2 seconds. But in those seconds, Malcolm Raye saw something that made every combat instinct start screaming. Behind those eyes was fear, controlled, suppressed, but unmistakable to someone who'd seen it in war zones. For 15 minutes, Raye tracked her without shifting his posture. She didn't speak once. When a toddler bumped into her, she flinched hard, full-body startle response. No adult comforted her. He noticed the slight limp in her left leg, a faint discoloration near her hairline when the breeze shifted her bangs, old bruising, yellow-green, weeks old. Every few minutes, one of the adults would pass close, adjust her backpack, murmur something quiet. They moved like handlers, Not family, like people managing a situation rather than enjoying a day out. And through it all, the girl remained silent as stone. Malcolm Raye had seen enough in his life to know when stillness meant fear, when quiet meant danger, when a child's unnatural calm was actually a cry for help that only trained eyes could read. The ripples were getting stronger. Soon they'd become waves. The girl hadn't moved in 20 minutes. This wasn't tired feet or shyness. Raye had seen that hollow stillness before, worn by children who'd learned that moving brought danger. A tourist in yellow approached cheerfully. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" The girl turned slightly, but never made eye contact. After a moment, she looked away, and Raye caught what the tourist missed, her eyes darting toward the man in the fedora, checking his reaction like she feared she'd done something wrong. The man with coffee returned, placing his hand on her shoulder, gentle enough to look paternal, but lingering too long. His fingers pressed slightly, a subtle reminder of control. None of these adults had said her name once. No Sarah, stay close, or casual chatter. The silence around this girl was unnatural. She wasn't asking questions or complaining about being bored. No child stood that quietly without being trained to. His gaze swept the group again. The woman in cargo trousers refastened the girl's backpack with mechanical efficiency, saying nothing. The man studying his map wasn't looking at tourist attractions. He was watching security cameras, noting guard positions. When the breeze picked up, Raye caught another glimpse of that bruise behind her ear. Finger-shaped marks from a hand that had gripped too tightly. Then the girl did something that ended all debate. She lifted her right hand to her cheek. 2 fingers pressed briefly, then an open palm drawn across her chest. It looked like brushing away hair, but Raye recognized it instantly. A distress signal, specific, taught in trauma centers. It meant, "I don't feel safe. Please help me." She repeated it slower, more deliberate, making sure he understood. None of the adults noticed. The man was moving toward her again. The group was shifting, preparing to leave. If they walked away with her, Malcolm Raye knew this little girl would vanish forever. The decision made itself. The moment his boot crossed the ceremonial boundary, tourists gasped. Phones whipped up. A child cheered, thinking it was part of the show. "Excuse me, sir." His voice cut through the noise, not loud, but carrying absolute authority. The man turned with practiced charm. "Yes, officer." Raye dropped to one knee beside the girl, abandoning all protocol. "Miss, I saw your signal. Are you safe?" Her eyes went wide, not with fear of him, but with dawning hope that someone had understood. "She's my niece," the man said quickly, his voice gaining an edge. "We're just leaving. She's been giving distress signals. I need to ask her questions." Palace security was already moving toward them, radioed by other guards the moment Raye broke formation. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Raye asked gently. The girl looked at the man, then back at Raye, her hands shaking now. "I'm not allowed to say," she whispered. Those words hit Raye like a physical blow, a 6-year-old who wasn't allowed to say her own name. "This is ridiculous," the man snapped. "We have places to be." "Not yet, you don't." Raye's voice dropped to that dangerous, quiet tone soldiers recognized as a warning. A security officer reached them. "Sergeant Raye, assessment? Possible child endangerment. Multiple distress signals observed. Claims family relationship, but child appears coached and fearful." The officer radioed immediately. "Control, priority response, request police backup." Witnesses began speaking up. She was alone for ages. "Thought she was lost," a teenager held up his phone. "I was live streaming. She was by herself. Then this guy just walked up." The man's mask slipped. "You can't film me." "Actually, I can," the teen replied, still recording. More guards formed a perimeter. The girl tugged Raye's tunic. "I want to go home," she whispered. The words hit the crowd like a stone in still water. Conversations stopped. "Where is home, sweetheart?" Raye asked gently. She opened her mouth, then looked fearfully at the adults. I don't know if I'm supposed to." The man lunged forward suddenly. "You don't understand. You've ruined everything." 3 security officers tackled him instantly. The girl screamed and buried her face against Raye's tunic. The police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. As the first police vehicles pulled up to the side gates, their blue lights reflecting off the palace windows, Raye remained exactly where he was, kneeling beside a frightened child, his ceremonial uniform wrinkled and his career probably in ruins, but his conscience absolutely clear. Sometimes the most important battles aren't fought on distant battlefields. Sometimes they happen in broad daylight, in front of hundreds of witnesses, when one person chooses to act while everyone else just watches. The Metropolitan Police took control of the scene with professional efficiency. Within minutes, the forecourt had been divided into zones, witnesses in one area, suspects in another, and the child safely separated from it all in a quiet corner with specially trained officers. Detective Sergeant Emma Pratt had arrived with the second wave of responders, her 20 years of experience in child protection immediately apparent in how she approached the situation. She took one look at the girl, now wrapped in a police-issued blanket despite the warm day, and understood that this case was going to require careful handling. "What's your real name, sweetheart?" she asked gently, crouching down to eye level. The girl hesitated, old conditioning warring with new safety. Then she reached into her pocket with trembling fingers and pulled out something small, a plastic bracelet, faded and partially hidden beneath her sleeve all day. The name printed in glitter letters read, "Sienna Croft." Detective Pratt's expression changed immediately. She glanced at her phone, tapped the screen several times, then looked up at her team with the kind of urgency that makes experienced officers pay attention. "We've got a match," she announced. "Missing child report filed yesterday morning. Birmingham confirmed missing person." The man, now handcuffed and sitting in the back of a police van, heard this and thrashed against his restraints. "You have no idea what you've done," he shouted through the open door. "No idea what you've cost us." The slip was telling. Not cost me, but cost us. Confirmation that this was bigger than one opportunistic predator. Raye, still in his ceremonial uniform, but now with grass stains on his knees and his white gloves smudged with dirt, stood back from the immediate chaos. Palace officials were clearly preparing for difficult conversations about protocol breaches and media management, but their questions could wait. Right now, he was watching a little girl who had been silent for over 24 hours, finally beginning to speak. "They told me my mummy didn't want me anymore," Sienna whispered to Detective Pratt, the words tumbling out in a rush now that the dam had broken. "They said if I talked to anyone, I'd never see her again. They said police wouldn't believe me." The detective's jaw tightened, but her voice remained gentle. "Well, they were wrong about that, weren't they? We believe you completely, and your mummy has been looking for you since the moment you disappeared." As if summoned by those words, Detective Pratt's radio crackled to life. Birmingham police had been contacted. Eleanor Croft was en route to London, having dropped everything the moment she received the call that her daughter had been found. She would be at the palace within 2 hours. The investigation moved quickly once they had Sienna's real identity. Vincent Dale, the man who had claimed to be her uncle, had no connection to the Croft family whatsoever. His criminal history revealed a pattern of offences involving children, though nothing that had stuck in court. The woman, Claire Hinton, claimed to be just a friend helping out, but her story changed 3 times during initial questioning. Most disturbing were the items found in their rental car, parked just 3 blocks away. Restraints, sedatives, fake identification documents, and detailed plans for leaving the country that very evening. If Raye hadn't intervened when he did, Sienna would have vanished across international borders within hours. The crowd had largely dispersed by now, but not before dozens of witnesses had given statements supporting Raye's actions. The teenager's live stream had captured the crucial moments, providing clear evidence of Sienna's distress signals and the suspicious behavior of her captors. Palace security finished their preliminary debriefing with Raye, who answered every question with military precision, while carefully not expressing any regret for his actions. When asked if he understood the potential consequences of abandoning his post, he replied simply, "I understood them completely, sir. I made an informed decision based on immediate threat assessment." As afternoon faded toward evening, the forecourt returned to something approaching normalcy. New guards had taken the ceremonial positions, tourists resumed their picture-taking, and the business of royal pageantry continued. But in a quiet room inside the palace complex, a 6-year-old girl named Sienna Croft sat wrapped in a blanket, slowly remembering what it felt like to be safe. And somewhere on the M40, a mother was driving toward London with tears streaming down her face, hardly daring to believe that her nightmare was finally over. Malcolm Raye had returned to barracks to change out of his ceremonial uniform and prepare for what would likely be extensive meetings with superior officers. His actions had been unprecedented, and precedent mattered deeply in an institution built on centuries of tradition. But as he hung up his red tunic and cleaned the grass stains from his boots, he found he couldn't bring himself to regret a single moment of what had happened. Sometimes duty meant following orders. Sometimes it meant breaking them. Today, it had meant paying attention when a child needed someone to see her. 2 hours later, Elena Croft burst through the doors of the Child Protection Unit like a force of nature barely contained. She had driven from Birmingham in record time, her hands shaking on the steering wheel every mile of the way, hardly daring to believe the phone call that had changed everything. The reunion was everything you might expect and nothing like the movies. Sienna didn't run into her mother's arms with dramatic music swelling in the background. Instead, she stood frozen for a moment, as if she'd forgotten that such happiness was possible. Then she whispered, "Mummy," like she was testing whether it was real. And when Elena nodded through her tears, Sienna finally broke. The sob that came out of her was weeks of fear and confusion and careful silence, all releasing at once. Elena scooped her up and held her with the fierce protectiveness of someone who had thought they'd lost everything and then gotten it back against all odds. "I never stopped looking," Elena whispered into her daughter's hair. "Not for 1 second. I knew you were out there. I knew you were waiting for me to find you." Detective Pratt watched from a respectful distance, having seen these reunions before, but never quite getting used to the raw emotion of families torn apart and pieced back together. In her 20 years of police work, these were the moments that made all the paperwork and court appearances and sleepless nights worthwhile. But there was one more reunion that needed to happen. "Sienna," the detective said gently, "there's someone who'd like to meet you properly. The guard who noticed you were in trouble. Would you like to thank him?" The little girl nodded against her mother's shoulder, suddenly shy again, but for different reasons now. Eleanor looked puzzled. The police had explained that a royal guard had intervened, but the details had been overshadowed by her desperate need to reach her daughter. 20 minutes later, Malcolm Raye walked into the family meeting room, wearing his service dress uniform instead of the ceremonial regalia. He looked different without the bearskin hat and formal pageantry, younger, somehow, more human. But his bearing still carried the quiet authority that had made him step forward when it mattered most. Sienna peeked out from her mother's embrace, studying his face with careful attention. "You're the one who heard me when I couldn't talk," she said finally. It wasn't a question, but Raye nodded anyway. "You were very brave to keep trying to signal for help. That took courage." "I thought no one would notice," she admitted, "but you did." Elena Croft looked between her daughter and this soldier who had risked his career for a child he'd never met. The full weight of what had almost happened, what would have happened without his intervention, hit her like a physical blow. "How can I ever thank you?" she asked, her voice breaking. Raye was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. Then he said something that surprised even him with its honesty. Just keep teaching her that there are good people in the world who will help when she needs it. That's thanks enough. Sienna reached into her pocket and pulled out a piece of paper she'd discovered while waiting, part of a colouring book from the Child Protection Unit. She'd carefully drawn 2 stick figures in crayon, one tall figure in a fuzzy hat, one small figure holding his hand. "This is for you," she said, offering it with the solemnity of a diplomatic treaty. Raye accepted the drawing with equal gravity, studying it as if it were a military citation. "This is the best award I've ever received," he told her, and meant every word. The meeting didn't last long. Sienna needed medical attention and psychological evaluation, and Elena needed to get her daughter home to begin the long process of healing. But before they left, Sienna did something unexpected. She walked over to Raye and, without asking permission, hugged his leg with surprising strength. "Thank you for seeing me," she whispered. Raye knelt down to her level one more time, his voice gentle but firm. "You don't ever have to be invisible again. Not to anyone. You understand?" She nodded, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, she smiled. A real smile, not born from politeness or fear, but from the beginning of understanding that she was truly safe. As they walked toward the door, Eleanor Croft turned back one more time. "What you did today, breaking protocol like that, won't you get in trouble?" Raye considered the question honestly. There would indeed be investigations, reviews, and very serious conversations about the precedent his actions might set. The military prized discipline and following orders above almost everything else. But when he looked at Sienna, now walking hand in hand with her mother toward a future that almost hadn't happened, his answer was simple. Some things are more important than protocol. The next morning brought a different kind of attention than Malcolm Raye had ever experienced in his 17 years of military service. The story had exploded across social media overnight. Grainy phone footage of a Royal Guard breaking ranks to save a child, witness statements praising his actions, and growing public pressure to commend rather than condemn his decision. Palace officials found themselves in the unusual position of managing a story that made them look good, rather than trying to contain a scandal. The Queen's private secretary issued a carefully worded statement acknowledging the exemplary judgment shown by Sergeant Raye in balancing ceremonial duties with child protection responsibilities. But the real validation came from an unexpected source. As Raye reported for what he assumed would be disciplinary meetings, he found the corridor outside the regimental offices lined with his fellow guards. They didn't cheer or break discipline by speaking out of turn. They simply stood at attention as he passed, their silence carrying more weight than any words could have. At the end of the corridor, his commanding officer waited with an expression that was impossible to read. "Sergeant Raye," Colonel Harrison began, his voice carrying the weight of institutional authority. "In 3 centuries of Royal Guard service, no soldier has abandoned his ceremonial post without direct orders." Raye stood at perfect attention, prepared for whatever consequences his actions had earned. "Your breach of protocol has been noted and will remain in your permanent file," the colonel continued. "However, it will be accompanied by a formal commendation for exceptional judgment in the protection of a vulnerable child." The relief was overwhelming, but Raye's military bearing held firm. "Thank you, sir." "The palace has also received a request," Colonel Harrison added, his stern expression softening slightly. "Young Miss Croft has asked if she might visit again, properly this time. To thank the guard who noticed her, would you be amenable to such a visit?" For the first time since this whole situation began, Malcolm Raye allowed himself to smile. "It would be my honour, sir." 3 weeks later, the palace forecourt looked exactly as it had on that morning when everything changed. Tourists wandered with cameras, Children pointed at the guards in their magnificent uniforms, and the timeless pageantry of British tradition continued unchanged. But for one small girl, walking hand in hand with her mother toward the gates, everything was different. Sienna Croft no longer moved with the careful silence of someone trying to disappear. Her steps had the natural bounce of childhood restored, and when she spotted the familiar red uniform of Sergeant Raye at his ceremonial post, she waved with uninhibited joy. This time the visit was official, arranged through proper channels, with palace staff providing a quiet space away from the crowds for a private meeting. When Raye stepped away from his duties to meet them, he was struck by the transformation in the little girl who had once stood frozen with fear in this same courtyard. "I brought you something," Sienna announced, producing a handmade card with all the ceremony of a state presentation. Inside, in carefully practiced letters, she had written, "Thank you for hearing me when I couldn't speak." Below the words was another drawing, more elaborate this time, showing the palace gates, tourists with cameras, and two figures at the centre, a tall guard and a small girl, connected by wavy lines that might have been meant to represent understanding or hope, or simply the invisible threads that connect people who help each other in moments of need. Raye accepted the card with the same gravity he would show a military decoration. "I'll treasure this," he told her, and meant it completely. As they prepared to leave, this time for a proper family vacation rather than a nightmare escaped, Sienna turned back once more. "Will you always watch for kids who need help?" she asked, with the directness that only children possess. Raye knelt to her level one final time, his voice carrying the weight of a promise. "Always! That's what we're really here for, to protect people, all people. But especially brave little girls who know how to ask for help even when they can't use words." She nodded with satisfaction, as if his answer had confirmed something important in her understanding of how the world worked. As their car pulled away from the palace, Eleanor Croft looked back at the guard who had given her daughter back to her. Malcolm Raye had returned to his ceremonial position, rifle at rest, face impassive to the tourists who had no idea they were looking at a hero. But she knew. Sienna knew. And sometimes that's enough. In a world full of people who look away, who assume someone else will handle the problem, who choose the safety of silence over the risk of action, there are still those who pay attention, who notice when something is wrong, who step forward when stepping forward might cost them everything. Staff Sergeant Malcolm Raye had risked his career, broken centuries of tradition, and shattered the invisible barriers between duty and humanity, all because a 6-year-old girl had trusted him to see what others missed. She had been right to trust him. And because of that trust, a child went home instead of disappearing forever. A family was restored instead of destroyed. And a tradition that had stood for 3 centuries proved that it was strong enough to bend, when bending meant saving a life. Sometimes the most important victories aren't won with weapons or strategy or overwhelming force. Sometimes they're won with attention, compassion, and the simple recognition that some things, protecting children, preserving families, choosing humanity over protocol, matter more than any rule ever written. Have you ever noticed something that didn't seem right, but talked yourself out of acting on it? How many times do we see signs of trouble and choose to assume someone else will handle it? Should Royal Guards receive specific training to recognise and respond to situations like this? What's the balance between maintaining ceremonial tradition and adapting to modern security needs? If this story changed how you see the guards at Buckingham Palace, if you now understand they're not just tourist attractions but real soldiers with real training and real hearts, show your respect by hitting that like button. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that reveal the humanity behind the uniform, and make sure to ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Share this video with someone who needs to understand the importance of paying attention, because sometimes saving a life starts with simply noticing what everyone else overlooks. Check out our other Royal Guard stories appearing on your screen now. Each one shows a different side of these remarkable soldiers who balance centuries of tradition with modern-day heroism. We'll see you tomorrow with another story that proves these guards are so much more than ceremonial statues. They're protectors, heroes, and sometimes the only thing standing between innocence and evil.